Alright, so hello everyone, I am Sethi, and primarily today we will be trying to be covering all the question answers that are given at the back exercise of the literature book of CBSE grade 10 commentative set of in the studies. And Julius Caesar is considered by a lot of students to be a chapter that is heavily frowned upon and not liked by most of the people that read the chapter at once. Why? Because the chapter is written in Old English. That leads to students not being able to understand last segments of the chapter and ultimately deciding to skip the chapter as a whole. That might be a very bad idea because in commutative and general English principles, when we see how CBSE tries to form the question papers of board examinations, they generally try to give more weightage to such chapters which get the reader to think of the world in a different perspective, understand hidden meanings, and all that is related to it. So, without wasting time, let's continue with the first question that talks about how do the heavens blaze forth the death of Julius Caesar? Right. So, in this question, it is talking about that the Shakespeare's time, unusual natural events were often believed to be the signs of great happenings. So, when we say that the heavens blaze for the death of Julius Caesar, it is basically one-on-one referring to the sky showing strange and fiery signs in the night just before Julius Caesar's death. That was thunder, lightning, meteors, and everything else. So these cosmic disturbances symbolize that Caesar's death would not just be the fall of a man, but the downfall of a mighty ruler whose fate was tied to Rome itself. So it was thundering, it was the weather had changed significantly, and we learned about the watchman's side where he saw multiple lions, they were birthed in the street, the people rising from their graves, and we also saw and heard about Calpurnia's dream. So all these were the signs sent by heaven talking about how Julius Caesar's death was eventually approaching and how Caesar could have omitted the death. So get into question B. What does Calpurnia try to convince Caesar of? Calpurnia was Caesar's wife. Basically, in the first act of the entire play, Calpurnia had been working towards convincing Caesar to not to go to the Roman Senate. She was terrified by the bad omens that she had seen and heard from the watchman himself that lions were given birth in the streets, graves were opening, ghosts were roaming, and the dream she had in the very bad picture of which, where she saw the statue of Julius Caesar was spouting and fountain blood all around. That was very bad of a sight. So she was practically begging her husband Julius Caesar not to go to the Roman Senate today. She says that Caesar, these are warnings from the God himself meant to protect him. However, Caesar dismisses all these warnings and still continues to go to the Senate. 32 question C. Why does Calpurnia say Caesar's wisdom is consumed in confidence? What does she mean? This is directly referring to that Julius Caesar ignored all the warnings that were given to him by Calpurnia herself and by gods themselves. So Julius Caesar considered these warnings to be of action to the normal man and none of significance to him, as someone as mighty as him. He calls himself more fierce and dangerous than danger itself. Now, that level of confidence is sometimes what can lead to ultimately demise of a person as a whole. So, what does Calpurnia dream about Caesar? How does Decius Brutus interpret the dream? Calpurnia dreams about Caesar having, well, turned into a statue which was fountain in blood all around, and lusty Romans were bathing their hands in it. So, a very bad scene that is. There was a fight taking place above the Roman Senate, out of which blood was falling all everywhere. And this same dream, when is told by Julius Caesar to Decius Brutus, is interpreted by Decius Brutus in a positive connotation. What does this mean? This refers to the fact that Decius Brutus makes the dream sound like the good dream that was of fair and fortune. So Decius Brutus does this because he was part of the set of conspirators that were planning to kill Julius Caesar through the conspiracy at the Roman Senate. So he had to ultimately get Caesar to go to the capital that day for the reason that the conspirators had planned the assassination of Julius Caesar that day. By interpreting this dream in a vision, fear, and fortune, he was successfully able to convince Julius Caesar to head to the Roman capital. Now, multiple arguments are put forward by Decius Brutus that is covered in the last question also that convince Caesar to go to the capital. But primarily the core factor over here is interpretation in good faith with a lot of reasoning and logic was what allowed Decius to stand out more than Calpurnia. Moreover, question F is rightly correlated to why was Decius successful in Calpurnia? Because Decius also did one thing that Calpurnia did not. Decius told Julius Caesar that the Roman Senate was thinking of offering the throne of the Roman Empire to Julius Caesar that day, and he was going to be crowned as the emperor of the Roman Empire that day. This lure successfully worked, and ultimately got Caesar so excited to go to the capital that he ultimately forgot about all the bad omens that were put forward by his wife Calpurnia. Now, the fact that Decius Brutus was a better orator, just like Antony was a better orator than Brutus, and the fact that he mocked the idea of the dreams and omens to him then silly, and all of those got Caesar to go to the capital. Once Caesar enters the capital, that is when we enter the second part of the act. So, the second act of the play that is in the syllabus. So, what is the petition put forward before Caesar by the conspirators? How does Caesar respond to it? Over here, when Caesar starts the session of the Roman Senate, Caesar is first and foremost asked to revoke the banishment of the brother of Cimber himself, that is Publius Cimber. Right? This idea did not seem very well to, Julius Caesar himself, because Publius Cimber's brother had been banished by a large amount of understanding that it was very wrong to have him in the empire. Rather, he compares himself, Julius Caesar compares himself to the Northern Star, to the Pole Star, that is constant and unmoving, and he refuses to change the decision. He calls the act of changing this to not be child's play, and that the decree that had been set by the Roman Senate priorly shall not be changed on the grounds that our moods have changed. We need valid reason in order to revoke the banishment. Ultimately, it is been the entire argument of or petition that was put forward by the conspirators to revoke the banishment of Publius Cimber's brother. So, moving ahead, this was acting as a spark to ultimately what was given by the conspirators as a reason of killing of Julius Caesar. As soon as this petition was denied, Casta was the first one to stab Julius Caesar, and all the conspirators in order continued forward to stab Julius Caesar, ultimately leading to his death after the final stab of Brutus. Who says et tu, Brute? Et tu, Brute are words spoken by Julius Caesar himself. These are famous words that translate from Latin to English as even you, Brutus. These are the spoken the moment Brutus, the most trusted friend of Julius Caesar, stabs him. These words actually show the depth of his shock and betrayal. After this final stab, Caesar stops resisting the act that was being done by the conspirators and falls, ultimately passing away. These words are of great significance because this shows how much trust Julius Caesar had on his friend Marcus Brutus. Marcus Brutus ultimately resorted to killing Julius Caesar just because he was convinced by Casta that, Cassius, that Rome is at danger because of Julius Caesar. And that is why Brutus stabbed Julius Caesar. In the moments following Caesar's death, what do conspirators proclaim to justify Caesar's death? There are three famous words that are spoken by the conspirators at this point. Those are liberty, freedom, and enfranchisement. Enfranchisement meaning tyranny is dead. So the conspirators claimed that Caesar was ambitious in nature and that the death of Julius Caesar has saved the Republic of Rome into becoming the dictatorship. And the concept of democracy and fair rights have been preserved by killing Julius Caesar because it was Caesar's ambition that caused Caesar's to fall. That is the argument that is put forward by the conspirators. See, in the body of Caesar, Antony is overcome by grief. What does he say about Caesar? Caesar was having two great best friends throughout the entire plot of Julius Caesar. That was Marcus Brutus and Mark Antony. Mark Antony was not a part of the conspiracy. Mark Antony rather was the person that got the conspirators to ultimately lead to their death. So what happens over here is when Antony comes just after the stabbing of Julius Caesar, he is left in complete and utter shock. He ultimately says, O mighty Caesar, dost thou lie so low? Are all thy conquests, glories, triumphs, spoils, shunned to this little measure? Fare thee well. These words ultimately mean that Antony is not able to understand and agree, well, trust the fact that all of Julius Caesar's might has been reduced to this small measure. It is ultimately an impossible scene in the eyes of Mark Antony. That is why Mark Antony says the words, has fare thee well. Fare thee well meaning I bid you goodbye. In complete utter shock and not being able to comprehend the situation as what has happened. He says that no ruler will ever be as mighty as man as noble Caesar was. He mourns not just his friend, but also the great loss to home. Following that, if we continue forward, we have whom does Antony call the choice and master spirits of the age? The conspirators, that were the people who ultimately killed Julius Caesar, have been labeled as the choice and master spirits of this age because in this sarcasm of his, he is pretending to admire the conspirators, but in reality is mocking them for their treachery. Now, the words, the choice and master spirits of this age has been chosen because they were the people who decided who lives and who dies. They are the people who took the decision that Caesar was too ambitious and that is why he deserved death. That is why they are the master spirits of this age in pure mockery said by Antony. Brutus and Cassius respond in, well, very bad form to Antony's speech because they do not relate with Antony. But Antony, being the good orator he is, somehow convinces Brutus and Cassius that he is on their side, when in reality he was forever and ever in the side of Julius Caesar. So Brutus trusts Antony and believes he will not harm the cause the conspirators have, and allows him to speak in the pulpit at the funeral speech of Julius Caesar. Cassius, however, is suspicious and fears Antony will stir the people against him, which is ultimately what happens in the plot of the entire chapter. Moving ahead, why does Cassius object to allowing Antony to speak at Caesar's funeral? How does Brutus overcome this objection? So Cassius objects strongly to Antony speaking at Caesar's funeral because he is aware of the fact that Mark Antony is a very good orator and very good speaker, and ultimately is feared that this will cause the conspirators to be in a lot of problem because Antony will make the public realize that the conspirators had done wrong. However, Brutus overcomes this obsession by placing conditions on the speech that will be given by Mark Antony. He says that Antony will only speak with the permission of the conspirators and will speak after Brutus has himself explained their reasoning. Brutus believes that his logical appeal will be stronger than that of Mark Antony. So, directly related to the next question, that is, what are the conditions imposed by the conspirators? There are some strict conditions that Antony must not blame the conspirators for the death of Caesar. Antony can only speak with the permission of the conspirators. Antony must speak well of Caesar and but not against the conspirators. And Antony ultimately agrees to these conditions. And one more condition there was that Antony will be speaking after Brutus in the same pulpit as Brutus. Now, Antony accepts these conditions knowing that he has a secret plan otherwise to just use his words to ultimately cite the next civil war inside the entirety of Rome. He does not require anything else except his words. When he is left alone with the body of Caesar, what does Antony call Brutus and the others? Well, when Antony is left with Caesar's body, he calls Brutus and the conspirators as butchers. He vows to avenge Caesar's murder and predicts war, or civil war that is, will tear Rome apart completely. There are multiple predictions that are made by Antony regarding the future events of Rome. He says that Caesar's death will unleash civil war, bloodshed, and destruction all across Rome. Then he continues to make forward a prophecy that will foreshadow the chaos that follows in the play. Multiple reasons are provided by Brutus for murdering Caesar. He claims that Caesar was killed by Brutus not because Brutus loved Caesar any less, but because he loved Rome more. Brutus feared Caesar's ambition would turn into tyranny very shortly and Rome will ultimately turn into dictatorship. This question has been brought forward in context of the arguments that were presented by Marcus Brutus during the speech that was given in the pulpit right before Mark Antony's speech. So the reasons that are provided is ambition, and love for Rome over the love for Caesar. That he is ready to sacrifice his bestest of friends, that is Julius Caesar, just for saving the country that he belongs to, Rome. Following this, who says, let him be Caesar's? This are the words that are spoken by citizens during the Brutus speech. It shows the fickle-mindedness of the common man and tells us that people are easily swayed, and ironically they want another Caesar even after he has been just been murdered for being ambitious. That the Roman public was very fickle-minded. They did not know what was right and wrong, and only got persuaded by the person who was speaking at the moment, who seemed more appealing, who just spoke. They agreed to whatever was being told. That is why when Brutus gave a speech, the Roman public agreed to Brutus, but when Antony brought forward his arguments and gave his speech, then ultimately the Roman public decided that Mark Antony was in the right, ultimately changing their minds from in favor of Brutus to Mark Antony. So this line shows light on the entirety class of the speaker of the general Roman myth, that they were fickle-minded. Now, why is Antony's speech more effective? Here we have to remember that Antony's speech was delivered in verse form instead of a prose. Brutus spoke a lot of content at once, while Antony decided to take it slowly and ultimately give his speech as a memory, as a legacy, lasting, and a tribute to his friend. Brutus, however, spent the entirety of his speech justifying his actions. Since Antony had not been part of the conspiracy, he had no justification to them. Rather, all he did in his speech was convey to the Roman people about how much he loved Caesar as a whole. So, Brutus spent the entirety of his speech convincing the public about a point, while Antony, being the better orator that he was, threw light about the love for Caesar and how much good Caesar had done, that people of Rome themselves automatically got into the understanding that killing of Julius Caesar was wrong, ultimately instigating them into, well, starting the civil war. Also, Antony's speech is more effective because he was able to bring forward the point of the will of Julius Caesar that is promised in the lot of benefit to the general people of Rome. That is why Antony's speech is spoken in a way that the will is introduced, but he says that the will content cannot be told by him just because of conditions imposed by the conspirators. Antony ultimately himself feeds words into the mouth of the citizens, getting the citizens to say that they are forcing Antony to reveal the contents of the will. Since Antony is now being forced, he is ultimately not denying or, well, not following the instructions of the conspirators and can speak out the contents of the will. That ultimately persuades the general public into believing how much Julius Caesar loved Rome and how much Julius Caesar loved the entire Roman population there was. Finally, the Brutus and Cassius at the end of the scene. By the end, Antony's speech has led to a civil war and a riot. Brutus and Cassius are forced to flee Rome, while Antony emerges as the leader of the people. The fate of Brutus and Antony is sealed, and they will ultimately meet their downfall in the war that takes place shortly after. In limelight of their fall or the wrong that they had done, both Brutus and Cassius ultimately commit suicide and end their lives. Ultimately, Julius Caesar is a wonderful play. It is one of the best plays I've seen in the entirety of CBSE syllabus as a whole. We have understood a detailed breakdown of all the three questions and answers there are in Julius Caesar. Remember that play isn't just about one man's death. It is rather about ambition, betrayal, loyalty, and the cost of power. So that ends us all. These were all confirmations that were present in Julius Caesar chapter from grade 10 CBSE communicative board, and I hope you enjoyed this video. Hope if you have any doubts, let me